Okay, so as a result of close miking, the snare sounds a little dry. Let's deal with that now. So when we reset the desk at the start of this session, that meant that the first 4 effects engines were routed to effects engines. Sorry, these first 4 dedicated effects sends were automatically routed to effects engines 1 through 4. There they are. Which means that actually all we need to do is here is our inputs. Effects engine number 1 is a reverb already. It's this reverb. If I'm going to use that for snare in this case, I want the decay time to come down somewhat. That's overall reverb time. Just basically further conversation to come on this in class, but essentially I don't want my reverb times to be too long with this track because of the tempo, and also stylistically it would sound most appropriate, I feel, if it was in somewhere in this region here. So that's a starting point. How this desk sends effects is sends on faders. So if we press that, these are like 4 additional auxiliaries sends, but they are dedicated to the effects engines, which actually means although it's a 12 bus console, it's 12 plus 4. And when this goes blue, that means that we're in sends on fader mode, and we're going to fade this up if we want some reverb. So let's have a listen to that. Earlier I was saying about routing the effects back through a group, so here's how I'm going to do that. So by default, when you reset the desk at the start, just come back to layer A, these first four effects sends here, or these 4 dedicated effects sends, send to the first 4 effects engines, and then they return, because there's the effects send, which is what this is, and then that effects engine is automatically outputted back to an effects return fader, which is like an input. And the effects return faders are, by default, let's find them, there you go, layer B at the end, that's where the effects returns are. Now, that's your normal faders, that's your effects sends. What you don't want to do, unless you're trying to do something really creative, is fade up the effects return fader send back up from the effects return, because you're going to get a feedback loop. Can be used for creative purposes, like a big sort of like fade in a delay return down a reverb send, for example, or fade in a delay back into a delay. One for a future class maybe, but you can create a bit of a feedback loop, and as long as you've got control over it, it can sound really cool, maybe in a big build towards the end of a track. But for now, just be aware that this is normal faders and this is sends on faders. So our normal effects return faders are faded up and are routed to the left-right. Don't want that. What I want to do is I want to send them to our effects group. So that's what I'm doing now. There we go, job done. Right, okay. just one about panning. Okay, the smaller the venue, you can be a little bit more extreme with your panning. Because, like in this venue here at Spirit Studios, for example, you've got the backline running as well. In order to get some space made, you can be a bit more extreme with your panning. So with the crash and ride, I am going to send them a good 50% left and 50% right at least. Might go a bit further, up to 75% left and right with those parts of the drum kit. Okay, that's not a realistic representation of how wide the drum kit really is for the audio-visual relationship, but you've got to hear a drum kit on stage, and judge it with a drum kit actually here in a small venue to be able to get that right. Essentially, when you're doing the virtual sound check in this room, I'm just going to give you the advisory of about 50% off to one side to 75% for now. As I say, the full picture really comes when you've got the back line in the room at the same time. But for now, that's what I do in a smaller venue. In bigger venues, like arenas and stuff, you've got to be very careful, because if you pan extremely off to one side, then you've got a lot of people who might miss that contribution to their overall balance. So with wide venues, you've got to be careful with your hard panning. But in this venue, you can be a little bit more extreme because it's pretty narrow.